Good afternoon, good morning, everyone. So we should get started. I'm Alexei Melnikov, and Seth is here with me as well. Right, can people see my slides? Yes? Right, okay, good. Okay. So, note well, I'm sure you've seen it before. If you haven't seen it, please consult and read relevant documents. So we're using Miteco. Miteco is being recorded. If you are seeing this, you're probably in the right place. We have a Jabber room, which is mirrored to the Miteco Jabber window. We have CodeMD page for the note-taking. Are there any volunteers for note-taking?
I will be taking notes, Alexei.
All right, thank you. Okay, so working group status. We got chartered. We did a bit of work in October. So I think even though it was a bit late, it was a productive start to the discussion. There are a few things that chairs are either late taking care of or still on our to-do list. So we still haven't selected editor for the core email applicability statement draft. We had 2 volunteers. We would like to have more than 2 volunteers, please. Some of the people who volunteered, we don't know, so we would like to conduct interviews. Please, 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 either volunteer or suggest somebody else who can be a good person. Somebody new would be great, but, you know, I think we'll take everybody. Apologies for late agenda and slides. I was waiting for feedback from our editors and done slides yesterday. So yes, I agree this is very late. And I started discussion on the mailing list. But remember that we're not going to close any issues today. Everything needs to be verified on the mailing list anyway. So this is just how IETF does things. There are no new rules here. So let's have a productive meeting. And the other thing is, I know the timing of this meeting is not great, but however, this is not much we can control. So agenda. So we're going to start with 5322 and take as long as we need. Then if there is desire and if we can get something productive, we'll get to 5321 bis. Any agenda bashing at this point? Okay, assuming none, let's get started. So 3 things we want to discuss with 5322 today. There was one issue that came out of actually a SMTP discussion about trace header field definition that NetFreed initiated. So we'll discuss this first, and then we'll discuss possible solutions for a couple of errata items.
Do I have, let's see.
We can hear you and see you.
Ah, there we go. So now you can hear me?
Yes, we can hear you.
Excellent.
Well, at least I can hear you.
Well, that's probably close enough. All right. Let me jump right in. I believe the issue of a definition for trace headers comes out of the discussion that was going on either on, I forget whether it was going on Email Core or IETF SMTP, such that it was clear what a trace header was, and people thought that this belonged in 5322. Just by way of reminder, and this will probably come up with other issues, the way 5322 was originally arranged, for any of the given fields, there was a syntactic description of what the field was, followed by the ABNF, followed by the sort of a semantic description, what it meant, what it was used for. So this sounds like the kind of thing that could go into the semantic portion, that second part for trace fields, and describe that, of course, these can be extended with optional fields, and say something additional about that. And I guess the question to the room is, what else needs to go in there? And does anybody have sort of an idea of what they want that text to look like, or what they need it to look like?
Ned might want to talk more about this, but there was also a related question about terminology, whether trace field is actually the best thing to call it.
Right, or whether this should be described as something else, right?
Like processing field or handling field or whatever, yes.
Yeah. Well, Ned has turned on his mic. Does Ned have sound? Not quite yet. And the little chasing arrows down in the lower right corner to reset your audio is quite helpful often. Well, while Ned's figuring that out, John, do you want to say something? Had to remove one of my coworkers, sorry. John, your mouth is moving, but you're not saying anything because your mute button is still on. You have video, but no audio. That seems more promising.
Yeah, right. What I started to say is, no, I don't want to say anything, but I think I will anyway. And my apologies for me missing the first part of your comments, because I had a little beat echo problem. But you may have covered this already. But to respond to two things I heard, the one thing I heard and saw on the slide, two things I heard, is that there was an argument about putting this stuff into 5321,
right?
Because these things are put in by and large, although we've now started talking about trace fields, which are post-delivery. They were historically all put in by the transport mechanism, except sometimes for where this started trace fields, which would have been put in by the submission server, which was until fairly recently in the grand scheme of these things, part of the transport mechanism as well.
Right.
The other observation is that they have been called trace fields for so long, and that terminology is scattered across enough documents and literature, not under the IETF's control, that changing that name at this point would be almost certain to cause far more disruption, problems, and confusion than it's worth, even if we came to the conclusion that that if we had a time machine and could go back to the time when 821 was written, that that we would have decided to call it Frizzle Frats.
Right, and like I said earlier, which you may not have heard, that sort of descriptive section after the ABNF, I think it has no impact to expand out and be clear about, that there are other header fields that sort of get used in a similar way. Either the transport mechanism is introducing them, or a delivery mechanism or a submission mechanism, and so it's expected that those things will be added in the same place, and that they, other mechanisms or the, the what do you call it? The my brain's flat. The other document, the applicability statement, might actually describe the different ways they're used in different circumstances, or 5321 bis might, or whatever. So I don't have a problem adding that in there. I'm just looking for some advice on what people want to add.
Yeah. And of course, the reason why this ended up in 5322 was precisely because these are header fields as we treat that, other than looking at how they were added or by whom.
Ned looks like he has his microphone on as well. So, Ned, did you want to join the fun as well? We're still not hearing Ned. My mic does not seem to work. Yeah, that does seem to be the case. All right. So my gut is I'm happy to post on the list. Please, somebody give me advice, and if I don't hear back in a few weeks, I'll make some crap up, and then people can fix it. Because I'm pretty sure I'm not going to get it right. But if people have something to say on this today, let's say it. Anybody else want to jump in? Otherwise, I'm happy to move on to the next one, which I'm hoping is a little easier. Okay, I will post a request on the list. I'm pretty sure, and Ned says, I'm pretty sure some of the crap that's added stretches the meaning. All right. So in any event, I'll post a query on the list for someone to come up with some text for me to add. And if I don't hear in a little bit, I'll make something up, and then we can at least have something to shoot at. All right. Do you want to go on to the next slide? This one, so I can just as simply put in the one, right? I can say that quoted strings must have something in them. And Alexi did, is that the following slide, Alexi? The where you went and looked? Go to the next slide if you would. So yeah, so it was Ashley who went through and said, these things aren't useful. And Alexi came up with the list below of empty quoted strings just are not semantically interesting any place. And so the question is whether to disallow them. The question I had was, are they actually causing implementability problems or interoperability problems? And if not, is there any harm in just leaving it alone, because any change to the document makes life unpleasant? But if they are causing people heartburn, I think it's a small enough change that we can say, look, we've had them forever, and we can put them into the obsolete syntax section and say, if you're going to use a quoted string, it has to have something in the middle. John, looks like you're up. John?
Yeah, I'm going to get tired of this very quickly.
Pushing the right button. Now yeah, I can hear you though. Go ahead.
Oh, well, okay. Uh, the place where these have caused problems is that is in addresses. Because we've had historical problems where various things pick up addresses and quoted strings, put them through processing in the operating system, and which have their own interpretation of what to do with quotes, and then quote and unquote and requote. And the fact that we've got a double quoting convention where we've got quoted strings using quote marks and quoted thingies using backslash is a problem as well. And I've certainly seen in addresses and in the transport system problems with these with quoted strings. And,
well, that's quoted strings in general, right? Not just empty ones.
And well, yes, but empty ones have proven a specific problem because we've run into operating systems which look at an empty quoted string and feel a need to remove the quotes.
Right.
As they quote or quote things. And if those quoted strings have any semantic value to anyone, which is something I haven't seen yet, then they cause a problem. And if they don't cause a problem and somebody starts comparing a source string which has quotes to a non-source string which has had the quotes removed, and the comparison fails because we don't have rules about how to make these comparisons, then we end up with interoperability problems. So right. Yes, we have seen difficulties with these. They are of no earthly use, and if we can get them out of there, it's probably an improvement.
Does someone want to?
Unless somebody can make a case that they are of more earthly use than I think they are, and
right.
And I think all the evidence we have is that they're not.
Someone want to make a case for empty quoted strings?
Just slightly playing devil's advocate. I think the only case I could think of is display name. So instead of, quotes Alexei space Melnikov, just have empty quotes, and it sort of seem, whether, I don't know whether people emit it, and if we stop allowing for it, what will break. But in all other cases, I think my very quick analysis from yesterday suggests that they are probably more problematic than they were. So one possibility is to special case the display name case
to allow
and disallow it everywhere else. But again, I'm not suggesting that that's necessarily the best idea.
And Dave, I saw a comment in the room. Do you want me to just read that, or do you want to just turn on your mic? I can do either. So Dave Crocker says, quoting or not quoting is not supposed to have semantic meaning. It's only intended as an encoding mechanism. So absent clear, concrete, compelling reports of significant problems don't change the spec. Which is kind of where I started. And if you take a look in 5322 bis, in the note about this errata, I believe I point to a discussion in 2002, for whatever that's worth, where this question came up and people said, no, leave it alone. It's just fine the way it is. Yeah, I'm ambivalent about this one. I don't like changing the syntax, but if it's causing damage and we know it's causing damage and they're not used in any particularly useful way, maybe we do want to correct it.
If somebody were trying to use one of these things in display name, presumably to explicitly suppress the display name, why wouldn't they use it as quote space quote? Because again, the things go away. But there is an alternative here if people feel like this is too radical a change for the 5322 bis syntax, which is to detach the definition of quoted string in 5321 bis from the 5322 bis definition and take it out there, because because in 5321, the only thing it affects is addresses, and that's where I've seen it's mailbox names, and that's where I've seen the problems.
Right. And you know, that's been the case consistently, you know, for a long time, that 5321 821 ... has always been the place that sort of, well, yeah, those are all nice and that was syntactically fine in the message, but when you're actually doing something and taking that and putting it into an SMTP command stream, you fix it. So Dave's follow-up, by the way, is the issue is not that it's suboptimal or unappealing, but that it's not known to cause serious problems. I thought the goal for this round of effort with the specs was to make minimum changes required. This one isn't required. So yeah, equivalent to what I was saying earlier. But John, you're saying that you've actually seen empty strings float in, empty quoted strings float in, and they have caused problems on the SMTP end.
What I've seen as the most extreme example is some ninny writing a mailbox name, which I guess we would describe as bracket, quote, quote, @ domain name.
Right. Global.
And when somebody fixes that, they end up with a syntax error, although the original is merely stupid as distinct from invalid. So I would argue that because we've seen damage there, that if someone wants to pursue this, I would hope I'm not it, but I may have to be. that we drop the 5322 discussion just on the basis that we haven't seen enough evidence of serious damage there, and that we fixed 5321. Which
to explain why this is a bad idea in local parts.
To take this out and explain why it's a bad idea. Now, one effect of that is that you would never end up seeing an empty quoted string in an SMTP provided trace field, but
and I'll jabber.
But there we get back to the question of whether prohibiting that in 5321 causes damage, and that gets us back to the argument that there's no evidence taking this out causes any damage at all.
Right, and so Ned says this. Ned says over in the jabber room, this is a layering violation since we don't specify the process for canonicalizing addresses. We don't have any way of telling what's legal for a given ADMD and what is not. It's perfectly permissible for an ADMD to allow an empty local part represented syntactically as a pair of quotes. Or not.
Sorry for the wonderful coffee sound in background, if you can hear it. Yeah, I'm just wondering, shall we just test this? I mean, it should be fairly simple to generate message with empty quotes in various kind of places like received header field and display name, and I can even generate keywords header field.
Well,
just so you know,
that brings us back to the argument that Pete and Dave are making, which is that we don't want to change the spec unless there's clear signs of damage, and there may be no clear signs of damage in 5322. And my difficulty is that because these things which mess with quotes tend to be operating system dependent, we could undoubtedly find two systems we could send these things to where they would work fine, and two systems where we could send these things to where they would not look fine. And fortunately or unfortunately, most of the examples I know of are operating systems which are not in heavy use anymore. For example, Windows 95 used to screw this up, and maybe we can say, who cares, except that we don't know what other artifacts are lying around.
Just so you know, it took me about 35 seconds to find examples of empty quoted strings in my email archive. It's in use in display name.
In addresses or somewhere else?
In display name. I mean,
Oh, okay.
quote, angle bracket, address, angle bracket.
Yeah.
Right. So for display names, yeah.
There are two algorithms I know of in MUAs that about what to do with the display name when the user doesn't supply one. And one of those algorithms is to supply an empty quoted string, okay, and the other is is the more common practice of copying the email address and copying the mailbox name into the display name and sometimes quoting it.
I know.
Yes. But this is stupid MUA syndrome, and we don't have to encourage it.
Yep. The thing is, we can't, given that it's prevalent, we can't tell people to throw away messages as syntactically illegal when they're there. So we can't disallow it.
So I'm hearing actually a resolution in some sense, which is this is not a 5322 issue to solve, and if there is an issue to solve, we toss this over to 5321 to deal with the handling at the SMTP layer of local parts that are empty, and we go on from there.
Well, there's another alternative which has the same effect as far as you're concerned, Pete, which is to go into the AS and say,
right,
these things are bad news, and sometimes they get distorted and stink, and sometimes they produce bad results in MUAs, and if you're going to do this, expect it isn't going to work sometimes.
Right. Okay. So I feel for my purposes, this one is pretty much done. And Alexei, I'll leave it to you whether you want to convert the issue to something other than a 5322 issue, or whether you want to close this one, assuming the list is okay with this. And obviously, we'll post that in summary. And if the list is cool with this idea, then reintroduce a new issue for 5321 or the AS, or however you want to do it.
Probably makes sense to convert it if we're just moving this text to AS document.
Yeah. Okay.
Resign.
I do think we need a working group decision as to whether this goes to 5321 or the AS.
Right.
Yes.
Okay. So that sounds like a good summary to bring to the list and make sure everybody's on board. Shall we go on to the next slide? Oh, the answer to Harold's question is yes. The ob syntax is still in there, hasn't changed. This one is an interesting errata that was filed, which was, hey, wait a minute, the header field name does not have a length limit in its description. And this one is yet another example of, well, it doesn't, but no one has really screwed it up yet. Do we want to change the syntax to say that it really can't be more than 77 characters long to leave space for the colon and the space after it? I guess for me, I'm looking for a reason to put in the 77 and then adding to the ob syntax to indicate that we used to say that it could be whatever length you wanted, but it really can't. I'm not sure it's worth doing.
I'm not either, but the case I would be most concerned about again comes back to these invented trace fields where one could, given current trends, easily see X dash flowers dash bloom dash in the spring dash tra-la dash.
I think someone actually did a survey of these through quite a few mailboxes of different origins and found the longest one out there was something on the order of 25 characters or some such. I don't remember who did it.
But the trend is people invent this idiocy has certainly been for them to get longer. Now, asymptotically, I don't know how long it takes us to get from 25 characters to 77, but but if this is really our last cut at this, at least a warning is probably in order that there is this line length limit overall, and if the trace fields exceed it, then if the field names exceed it, then they will get themselves into trouble sooner or later.
Right.
And again, we can put a warning like that in the AS if you don't want it in 5322.
Yeah, I don't feel strongly about that. So I'm willing to take advice.
I'm tempted to say it's ABNF comment, but I have no strong feelings about this. This is
ABNF comment that if you make these stupidly long, you'll get in trouble would certainly meet my needs.
I think that's the last of the issues we had to discuss for 5322. Am I correct?
yes.
We're on time to switch to 5321.
All right. Kurt says making it explicit will solve for lots of semicircular arguments amongst people having difficulty counting. Yeah. Yeah. Like I said, I'm it's the working group's choice, but I'm personally, with editor hat off, of the mind that the less changes, the better. Ned says you can't break a header field name, so the effect is that you should limit these things to 78 characters, including the colon. Right. All right.
And again, that sounds to me like a perfectly good comment in the ABNF per Alexi's observation. And that's not really a change in the sense that you're worried about changes.
Yeah. All right. Well, I'll get what summary we've heard here posted to the list for these issues, and assuming everybody is happy with what I described them as, we'll go forward and do something. So I will pass the baton over to John at this point.
I reshuffled issues a little bit, starting with slightly easier first. Well, which I think are now easier, but obviously.
I see I'm permanently in queue and it won't let me leave it.
To present something, John, if you turn that up. Yeah, well.
Yeah, well, as indicated earlier, I'm not prepared for this. I'm also having a great deal of difficulty reading the screen.
Would you like me to read it, if it helps?
No, it's okay. This opens a can of worms. The can of worms is not the registry, the absence of the registry, but this whole issue of relay and delivery, which gets back to Dave Crocker's comment on the list. I can make a strong argument against taking those out entirely, which is not what this is about. If we want yet another registry, let's create yet another registry. But again, this gets us tangled up with who's responsible for with which document is responsible for header fields. It gets us tangled up with a lot of semi-historical things about gateways, which are not precisely relay devices, relays, and and all of the reasons why SMTP was very carefully designed back to Craig Partridge's little amendment to operate in a terrible connectivity environment. And there's a case to be made that we ought to be ripping a whole lot of that out because we don't have as many interconnected non-TCP/IP networks as we used to, and maybe it all needs rethinking. But that, of course, would be a change so significant that we'd be back in proposed standard in a second. So I'm indifferent to this. I recorded it. I don't have strong preferences one way or the other.
Based on the mailing list responses so far, I think people question whether expert review is a good policy for this because of how many proprietary header fields there are. So we can do first come, first serve. My personal concern in this case would be if people don't add information which is right, they say it's like it's only been done by relay, but it's done by other entities who can correct the information. So
but
we're not
but
talking about
that's-
removing header fields, but just correcting it. So how do we want to go about this?
But that's also true of expert review ultimately. Somebody ends up having to referee who can make changes if the person who originally proposed the registration isn't responding to stimuli. I've got a general bias that registries are a good idea because they prevent conflicting uses of names, but I'm not certain that applies in this case. And yes, if people start squatting on names, if we end up with correction problems, if we end up with incorrect information problems, it's an issue. And maybe this is one of the ones where we ought to leave the registry to Wikipedia rather than to IANA, which is to say, wash our hands of the problem.
This is Barry. This is not talking about a registry that's going to avoid name collisions because the name collisions are already taken care of by the registry that they are required to be in. This is a registry about the usage of them. Yeah. I guess I'm ambivalent about it also. I don't see a strong reason to wrap ourselves around axles with this. I would say we should defer the discussion of it to the AS and do it in the AS if we think it's necessary.
That's certainly an answer, and of course we can defer the discussion to the AS and then lose it. Part of what causes me concern about this is that we have never really tried to seriously and precisely define the situation in which something is running as a relatively passive relay at the administrative boundary of the delivery environment. But the real delivery MTA is behind it. This situation occurs rather frequently with enterprise firewalls, which are answering to SMTP because it's the only way they can filter whatever they're trying to filter. And because we've never really tried to define that administrative boundary stuff in any way that affects 5321, although there's language in the in Dave's architecture document. I think we're opening cans of worms here.
Let me quickly read Ned's comments. So he said, I'm actually in favor of including more information in the registry and then preventing people with suggestions as to when to use something and when not to use. I'm having a hard time seeing this as a bad thing.
That would work for me. I am ambivalent as well.
So I think tentatively I've heard that we'll probably do this in AS document. And there is some support for it.
Okay, since this is the second referral, and I am the current unwilling pen holder for the AS document, have we made any progress on finding an editor who can actually keep track of these things?
No, but it's on our to-do list. We need to talk to interview the person who volunteered, and I asked for more volunteers.
It's on your to-do list for soon, or after
Yes.
the next IETF meeting starts?
You're really putting me on the spot. No, we'll try to deal with it like within a couple of weeks. Okay. If we can.
Well, let's see, your lips look like they're moving. You suddenly stopped talking.
Sorry, I muted myself, and then I was saying, let's move on to the next one. Right, so this one is for ABNF lovers among us, and this turned out to be actually quite complicated in details. But I think it's a good thing to start this here just to get an idea how people feel about it. So basically, there were two erratums submitted. One was rejected, then there was a more extended one suggesting to align this with RFC 3986, which is URI spec, and RFC 5952, which is like human readable syntax for IPv6 addresses. Basically, John did a very good job updating it to match URI spec, but URI spec doesn't quite conform to 5952. Well, I mean, you know, they were published at different times, so that's not entirely surprising. So if you see on the next slide, yeah, so like leading zeros as well as hex digits are supposed to be all in lowercase in the recommendation. So before we actually go to my straw man, question is there, let's say, just for the sake of argument, that we mandate that all hex digits are going to be lowercase. Is this going to be an interop problem? All right, so Ned said he posted a message to the mailing list, which unfortunately I haven't seen. He suggests we take it to the mailing list.
I'm in favor of that. One observation, which is that if people are going to point to this mess, then there needs to be then my strong recommendation to the ISG, which I hope I don't have to make in the form of an appeal, is that we need to straighten out this IPv6 syntax and make it definitive. And that's probably something which, given where this started, needs to come out of the presumably the internet area and the IP area, and updates all of these stray documents which have their own strange ideas about syntax. And when that's done, then it becomes appropriate to change 5321 to match whatever it is that says. But what has happened here is that we put syntax into 2821, which matched the then theory as to what IPv6 addresses look like. We put syntax into 5321, which matched the then syntax as to what IPv6 addresses look like. And now we're talking about changing 5321 bis to match whatever we think IP addresses look like, which is changed each time. And I'm in principle opposed to changing it again, unless there's a clear statement of IETF-wide applicability as to what IPv6 address is supposed to look like. Ideally, either there or then we do something in 5321 or an AS, which says that for historical reasons you ought to permit the following kinds of flexibility. And again, we can take that to the list, but I'm at least mildly opposed to changing this a third time as the tides go in and out and various documents.
Form defining network.
I don't know who that was or where it came from.
No, I had no idea.
But as various documents come up with their own theories of what this ought to look like, we need an IETF-wide definitive syntax for this, and then everybody else has to start adapting.
Sounds good.
Rant.
Right, and I'll just quickly show the next slide, which shows complicated and 5952 is actually inconsistent with itself, so there are issues there. Okay.
Yeah, in general, I am opposed to changing, and this is reminiscent of Keith's comment with the added observation that we changed it, we risk making more mistakes. I'm opposed to making changes in 5321 because of things that the 5952 and especially 3986 decided creatively to do or not do.
Right, understood. Okay, next slide. So this one might be a very little issue, or it might be big grenade. I have no idea. So let's just have a go at it. So, John, you pointed out that there is a definition of domain names and, well, domain names as used in SMTP, and it says only resolvable, fully qualified domain names are permitted. You suggested clarifying resolvable in the public DNS. I am sort of personally suggesting to go the other way by saying, by just removing resolvable, because I think whenever you talk about resolvability of domain names, it's quite clear in the context in the rest of the document. But let's have a quick discussion of this, if we can.
This is language which is connected ultimately to the Pastel principle. We've avoided in 5321 and its relatives creating the sort of you can send this, but you you can receive this, but you shouldn't send it stuff. And much as it might be appropriate in some places, that would be a fairly major change in the text. The reason for resolvable is that without resolvable, fully qualified domain name begins to look a whole lot like something with some ASCII characters and some dots in it, as long as you don't have two consecutive dots. And indeed, without the restriction on ASCII characters, not because of the SMTP UTF-8 work, but because modulo syntax restrictions in 8 21, which made their way into 1134 and 1135 is the preferred syntax. There's no domain name need for this restriction. So resolvable is the only thing which differentiates a domain name which you can look up someplace in your context from gibberish. Again, I'm a little reluctant to start fooling with this lest we introduce unexpected problems. But when readers come to the conclusion that if it says this, you ought to start testing and rejecting in various places, we're pushing a historical boundary, and maybe the right thing to do is to have the AS explain that historical boundary to people. But I'm reluctant to take resolvable out. And again, however, this thing came to me, and I don't feel nearly as strongly as this slide might indicate about how we might handle this. Public DNS is an issue. I don't know if it's helpful or not, especially when we get down to trace fields, to restrict people from putting nonsense there. Localhost is or is not a publicly resolvable domain name or a domain name in the public DNS, depending on who you ask or the context you're talking about. And again, the variation of the robustness principle, which says a little good sense goes a long way, would be helpfully applied here.
Yeah, there's nothing in
here.
here.
What we're trying to accomplish.
And there's nothing in here that says public. So use within a particular administrative domain where something might be resolvable that isn't resolvable outside is an issue. There are a whole lot of issues here. There are a whole lot of dragons involved with changing this. I think I feel fairly strongly that for the stability of the document and the other documents that reference it, we should not change it. And we can discuss the issue in the AS, but not change what we say here.
Yeah, I think that's right, and I'd add that if we start trying to parse this and put qualifiers and details here, we're rapidly going to have to separate domain names and addresses from domain names in various other places, and that introduces complexity and the potential for errors that we really don't need, unless there's a compelling reason for doing this, and I haven't seen it yet.
Right, so comments from Ned was, he was agreeing with me. There are many private use cases, so I don't know whether, I think Ned is probably, Ned, are you happy with no change, or are you happy with deleting resolvable still? Dave said that he wants no change. He thinks ambiguity is actually a good thing here. Ned still thinks that he wants to drop resolvable.
I think removing the word resolvable is likely to have consequences we are not aware of and won't find out about until it's too late.
Yeah.
I actually think that the places where it talks about relate to the next hop, this is where it talks about resolvable anyway. So there is no need to be resolvable in this section. That's my point.
Again, my concern is about unintended consequences of making that move. I think you're right, incidentally, but my concern is about unintended consequences of making that move, and the next hop problem interacts with the gateway problem. I don't know.
Right, it looks like we're sort of don't have quite enough consensus between dropping resolvable or no change, but I think we definitely don't want to say add in public DNS here, which is a good thing, I suppose. let's take it to the mailing list because we need to figure out what we want here.
Yeah, the reason, if I remember the original discussion for the request to add the public DNS was simply that if the domain name appears someplace that a recipient has to get hold, has to do something with it, then if it's put in by somewhere near the sender, and if it's put in someplace where the recipient has to deal with it, then the recipient has no hope of interpreting anything else, and that's the argument I don't find it particularly compelling.
Right. So this actually made me wonder whether I should split the ticket to two. One is about whether it should say resolvable here, and the other about private domain names. I think private domain names, we agreed we don't want to talk about it here, but maybe in AS. Does it help to split the ticket? What do you think, John?
My personal preference, partially because I'm afraid of side effects of touching stuff like this rather than because I'm opposed. But my personal preference would be to put a discussion into the AS about what resolvable means and how one might interpret it, and in particular, strongly discouraging the attempt to resolve anything you see when it's received. Keeping in mind that one of the reasons why resolvable is here is that if a domain name appears in a mail command, and the message reaches the other end and somebody tries to do a reply, or even bounce a message, that if that is not a public resolvable type domain name, it's hopeless. And again, I'd be happier having a lucky editor put text to that effect, explain that situation or warning about it in the AS than tampering with this text. But that's strongly influenced by my bias against tampering with things whose consequences we can't fully anticipate.
Right. Okay, so I hope Seth is taking good notes for this section. I think
Yeah, we've got very good notes for the section. We're also about 2.5 minutes away from the end,
which is just as well. Yeah, because the next one might be a rat hole. So you can have a 2 minutes of rat hole if you like.
Let me explain what I think this is about without taking any position on it at all.
Sounds good.
Historically, we have argued that there are two kinds of things which make one address into more addresses and send them out. To avoid using any of the vocabulary that gets complicated. One of those things operates strictly at SMTP level and may not work anymore because of other things we've done to the internet, but that's not an SMTP problem. And those things should not be messing with anything but trace fields because they shouldn't need to. The other kind, as Dave explained on the mailing list better than I can do at this hour of the morning, are things where the mail is delivered to something, which then simulates an exploding MUA type of thing, and sends it back out. And in that situation, all kinds of interesting things get changed because it's actually a new message, which the message coming into that pseudo MUA past the delivery server basically constituted a request to turn in some other message and redistribute it. And in that second model, adding list fields is entirely reasonable and appropriate, but it has nothing to do with the first model. So in some sense, the question here is not whether to diddle around with list ** fields in 5321. It's a question as to whether to eliminate or eliminate that MTA level exploder option entirely, or clarify it out of existence. And in a DMARC world, you know, as I say, I don't know if it's viable anymore.
So I think what you're saying is this restriction is valid for MTA level exploder, but not for the mailing list. So
valid for an MTA level exploder if there is such a thing.
And Alexi, Dave Crocker's had his hand up in the queue for a couple of minutes.
all right, Dave, you go ahead, and you probably have the closing words.
So we need to remember just how far back this section got written, what we didn't know, what alternatives we didn't have that we now have. I understand the reason for thinking that aliases are at the MTA level, because in an implementation sense, they typically are, but architecturally, they aren't. The mail is delivered. The alias mechanism happens to be a very streamlined capability, but it is architecturally after delivery, just like mailing lists. The fact that they're super streamlined and they don't mess around with a lot of the data and they preserve a lot of the data makes it really easy to think that it's part of the relaying process, but aliases are not part of relaying. They come after delivery. They are a reposting mechanism that just preserves the heck out of the message that it got, whereas mailing lists don't do that much preservation. The reality today is that this world of additional handling has gotten so much more elaborate and better documented that there's just no way 5321 is going to do justice to these topics anymore.
My concern about that view of the architecture takes us back to the gateway and semi-gateway and pseudo-gateway problem, which is itself a can of worms. And the possible need to apply aliases there in order to make addresses work in the environment at the other side of the thing, which is fussy. And we don't have a clear boundary between relays and things which move mail into slightly different kinds of systems, gateways and almost gateways and other things. And I'm reluctant for that reason and some others to eliminate the MTA level alias, if you like, expansion capability or renaming capability. Although I completely agree with Dave's observation that that in the modern world, for both the reasons he's identified and other sets of reasons, that we may not see this very often. But when we've got something which is at a boundary into a different kind of environment, even if it's using SMTP on both sides, for that to expand things really may be an MTA function. Handy example is peculiar handling of postmaster in some environments, which has always been an odd special case and will continue to be one until we eliminate that requirement, which de facto is gone in many places. So again, I'm reluctant to make changes absent compelling need.
Right. Quickly, I think we might be shut down anytime now because we are past 5 minutes past the end of it. So Ned was saying, except that it isn't, I think in response to Dave, that just isn't how things work. He posted on the mailing list, so let's take this to the mailing list.
Okay.
Thank you everyone for coming and staying so late or so early. I know the time is not ideal this time, but thank you for participating. And we'll see you online, and we might even have an interim very soon. But we haven't discussed this between chairs and ADs yet, so we'll let the mailing list know.
Thank you, everyone.